Okay, well, God bless everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for joining us on this Thursday night. And this is Thursday, December the 19th. We're getting very close to Christmas Day coming up next Wednesday. And it's a great time to be together in the Word and continuing our study of the foundational truths and principles of Genesis. And what we've learned is Genesis sets down so many things that are applied to so many things throughout the Bible. You'll read in the Bible, and it seems like every book has references to things that are recorded in the Old Testament. And we're getting through the life of Abraham, and so many things have been said about Abraham, the wonderful man he was, and how he was a friend of God. And we can see why. I mean, they talked often. I mean, and God made all these kinds of wild requests of this man, and he said, okay. And yes, I want you to sacrifice your son. Okay. Yes, I want you to be circumcised. Okay. Yes. And yes, I'm going to make your descendants like the sand of the sea. Okay. Yes, you're going to have a baby, even though you're old. Okay. What a wonderful example for us to follow. And every time he said okay, it came to pass. So really our lives are kind of simple. We say okay. When God says something, we say okay. So that's real simple trust. And that's what we want to develop in our lives to have that trust that Abraham had. And then God said that his believing it was counted to him as righteousness before he did any of this other stuff. He hadn't entered into that covenant of circumcision. He hadn't entered into this stuff. And he said, but you believe me, you trust me, and that I'm counting as righteousness to you. And righteousness is a big deal. And we know in this particular time in life, a lot of people say we are righteous. We've been taught in years past that we are righteous, and technically we're not. We are declared righteous. That's the difference. God is the judge, and our case was presented to him, and Jesus Christ died for us. So he said, it's done. It's got free. You don't have to go to jail. You don't have to die. I'm declaring you righteous. So sometimes that gets overlooked sometime. And but in the light of Abraham's believing in the righteousness we've been declared in Jesus Christ, we got a lot of stuff going for us, stuff we didn't deserve, stuff we didn't work for. We're like spoiled little kids, aren't we? Here you go. And God says, it's too big a deal. So I'll just give it to you. There's nothing you can do to earn it. So, I'll give it to you. And that's what a loving father does with his kids. He knows what they had need of. We were in desperate situation. We had inherited the sin nature. We are sinners. The wages of sin is death. Okay, I've got it all figured out. And so we've got what we've got because he figured it out. And we say, okay. So let's. Last week we studied Genesis 24. We read the detailed account of how he sent his senior servant, one of his servants had been around a long time, to go up in Haran, his old stomping grounds up there in north of Canaan, and find my son a wife, and don't you bring back a Canaanite. He was very emphatic about that. And the servant says, well, what if she doesn't want to come? Well, if she doesn't want to come, she doesn't want to come, but don't bring a Canaanite. So he wasn't going to settle for a Canaanite. He wanted someone from his family that he knew that had goodness. Now, not all of his family had goodness. That's why one of the reasons why Abraham and Sarah, God said, go, but leave everybody behind. Leave those people behind. I want you to go. Now, somehow, and you've heard me talk about it, Lot got involved. And that was his nephew. But as we look at Lot, we don't hear about Lot anymore. He faded out. And but there's a lot of stuff that Lot did that wasn't such a good thing. He got involved and he had to go, Abraham had to go to war and to rescue him, had to get him out of Sodom before he got burned up with the rest. And there's just one thing after another. But I won't harp on Lot. You might have different opinions, and that's fine. I don't think the Bible is totally clear because it did say righteous Lot was vexed by all this stuff happening in Sodom. And I said, well, I would be too. I think I would have moved. So I don't have a lot. Okay, I'm off on a tangent. So we're going to go in tonight into Genesis 25. And if you'll take your Bibles, we'll be looking in the REV as usual. And we're going to start in Genesis 25. And I'm going to share my screen here. So you can just look on the screen if that works for you better. And let me go on my check marks. And oops, I've got something on my screen I don't want to. I want to go to Genesis right now. So I'm going to have to do a repeat here. Now I got it. Okay, so as you can see, we're in Genesis chapter 25. And the heading is Abraham's other wife. And sons. Sometime I don't think the general Bible crew knows that Abraham had more than one wife. They think in terms of Hagar and Ishmael, and they think of as and Sarah and her son Isaac. But he did. And here it is. Here's the record. And then we're going to read verse 1 here. And Abraham had taken another wife, and her name was Keturah. There you are, plain as day. Now, the chronology of this event isn't clearly stated. Did he take her after Sarah died? Could have. Did he take her before Sarah died and before Isaac was born? Could have. We don't know. But anyhow, he did take on Keturah, and Keturah was considered like a concubine, a lesser wife, is what I'm told. That's what I don't read that exactly in the record, but it seems that's the way it is. And she bore him, Abraham. So she's going to bear him Zimram, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we've got Isaac is 7, and we've got Ishmael is 8. So after all, he had 8 sons. It doesn't always, oftentimes, as you know, these records oftentimes leave out the daughters. I'm sorry, ladies, I'm not sure why that is done, but I think it's mostly because the descendants follow the male side most of the time. But then when you look in the genealogy of Jesus Christ, well, there's Ruth, there's Rahab's in there. So sometimes there's exceptions to that. So here we've got, so now we have the sons of Midian in verse 4. And that's kind of interesting. Now think about it. Where have you heard Midian before? You Bible fans? A very famous person in the Bible spent some time in Midian. Now the sons of Midian, these are Abraham, one of Abraham's sons. Now his grandsons would have been Ephah, as the verse goes on before, Epher, Henoch, Abida, Eldad, and these were all these children were children of Keturah, but the sons of Midian were this listed off. So this, if I understand,
you skipped 3, honey.
I skipped 3. Oh, I did skip 3. Okay, yeah, and Jehoiada. Okay, we're finding out the other sons. Thank you, Carolyn. The other sons of okay, we got Keturah, and I just read off her sons. Now we got Jokshan, who fathered Sheba and Dedan, and the sons of Danan were the Asherites, and these other guys here. Let's see, the Limonites. I got to move my pictures away as carrying it. And then we get into the sons of Midian. And so it looks like we're getting into the sons of Abraham and Keturah, and then into the grandsons. And the sons of Midian are these guys. And it's kind of interesting. This group of people is thought to set up the grouping called the Midianites. Like Jacob, as you know, fathered his 12 sons, and they became Israel. These became the Midianites. And what's interesting about Midian is that if you've thought about it now, you may have recalled that it was Moses who went out to the land of Midian. So he spent time in this Midian area, which is out east. And so as time goes by, Abraham, he has these two concubines, as we just said. We've got the two concubines, Keturah and Hagar, earlier. And now Abraham gives all that he had to Isaac. So he was the heir, he was the promised seed. And so he gave all that he's had. But that doesn't mean every last dime, because it says in the next verse, but to the sons of the concubines whom Abraham had, he gave gifts while he was still living. So the full inheritance went to Isaac, but he gave gifts to his other children, and he sent them away from Isaac eastward to the land of the east. And this is where we get into the Midianites and other areas. It seems to be obvious that God wanted a separation between those descendants and the descendants of Isaac. Isaac, of course, would be the the believer's line, and he would also inherit the land, and God's going to tell him about the land, just like Abraham was told. So in verse, okay. All right, in verse 7, Abraham lived 100. Now, these are the days of years of Abraham's life that he lived. He lived 175. And if you recall, he came into Canaan when he was 75. So he has spent 100 years in the Canaanite area, Canaan. Verse 8, Abraham breathed his last and died at a good old age, old and full of years, and was gathered to his people. Really nice. Didn't have a hurtful end of his life. He just breathed his last. And the breathe this last is kind of an interesting word. It's taken out of the Hebrew word called gaba, and it simply just means to exhale for the last time. Now, some of you may have worked in hospitals. I worked in hospitals in my life. And they never said a person passed away or died. They always say he expired. And that's really from the Latin word, the ex meaning out, and spiredre meaning breath. So expired is the last breath. Now that's used in the context of a person breathing their last. Now, on a milk carton, it means something else, doesn't it? So we have expiration dates that don't all refer to that. So it was a common word at that time. But before the 1800s, they used another term, and you King James folks probably are going to know what that term is, and that is give up the ghost. He gave up the ghost. And that getting of the ghost, well, you can see where they probably got it. But what that happens, it almost sounds like, oh, there's something still alive. You know, there's that soul that moves on to another place. He gave it up, so somebody else has got it. And that gives the wrong connotation. This tended to make people think that maybe they lived on, or the soul lived on. But really, it's just breathed his last. Okay, let's take a look. And now the phrase gathered to his people simply means, in the case of death, at the end of the life, the Bible will say he died and was gathered to his people. And this is common saying. And it's consistent with saying all people, whether good or bad, because the people who died that were bad and the people who died that were good are still gathered with their people. And that gathered with their people is just being brought to one place, which we know of as Sheol. So some of the ancestors of Abraham were idol worships, but yet they were all gathered together. So when we see gathered with his people, it doesn't mean, oh, he's in heaven or he's with the good people. It's just the state of the dead. It's very simple. Verse 9, and Isaac and Ishmael, his sons, buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar, the Hittite, that is before Mamre. So we're very familiar with this. We talked about the oaks at Mamre, and we talked about Ai and Bethel up there, and the cave of Machpelah when Abraham bought it. This was the only really piece of property in Canaan that he owned. He's going to have a whole lot of land in the age to come, but that's all he had in his lifetime. And Machpelah means it's like a double cave or a wide cave. he had in mind that other people would be buried there. And as those of us have been Israel, and those of us, all of us who've read the Bible, we know several people of his relatives were buried there. In verse 10, the field that Abraham purchased from the children of Heth, we remember that record just a few chapters ago. Abraham was buried there with Sarah, his wife. So, and after the death of Abraham, God blessed Isaac, his son, and Isaac lived by Beer-lahai-roi, which is still in that area near Beersheba and Gahar, as we're going to see. All right. Let's move on here to, I think that's it. Verse 12. Now these are the descendants of Ishmael. So now we're going to change into another line of thought and some more information. We know about Hagar, and we know Ishmael was her son. This is actually the first son of Abraham. And Abraham's son, whom Hagar, the Egyptian, Sarah's slave girl, bore to Abraham. There's the details. Verse 13. And these are the names of the sons of Ishmael. Now, we talked about this a little bit earlier. By their names according to the order of their birth. The firstborn was Ishmael. The firstborn of Ishmael was Nebaioth, then Kedar, then Adbel, then Misham, then Mishma, Dumas, Massa, Hadad, Tema, Jeter, Nahish, and Kedemah. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names by their villages and by their encampments, 12 rulers according to the tribal groups. Remember that? We read that not too long ago. So these guys lived a lot like Abraham did. They lived by their encampments. They moved. When the water was dried up, the food wasn't there, they went to another spot. And we realized, and we read this earlier about his sons and the promises that God made to Ishmael's son. So here we are, God fulfilling the prophecies that he made even to Ishmael, which if he did that to Ishmael, how much even more are the promises he made to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and all the way up to the Messiah. God is proving himself as a promise keeper. And he points out, even in these kinds of situations, he wants you to know when he says something, he's going to do it. Now, that was fulfilled. And that's taken, if you want to check that out, but we went over that back in Genesis 17, verse 20. And this is showing that those prophecies that were recorded back then are now being fulfilled. Okay, so verse 17, these are the years of the life of Ishmael. It was 137 years. And he breathed his last, same thing, just like Abraham was described, and died and was gathered to his people. And he settled, this is Ishmael, had settled in the Havilah to Shur, which is east of Egypt as you go toward Ashur. And he lived there near all of his brothers. So Ishmael was in a different place. He was down south near Egypt in these areas that we just talked about, Syria and down in there. Let me check real quick. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. I think I have a map of that set up here. No, this is another one. I'll show you this map in a little bit. Okay, I'm going to reshare here. Okay, so back to this area. Now, Ashur is brought up in other places in the Bible, and it's not a part of Syria. Sometimes people think it is, but Saul fought the Amalekites in Ashur. Let's take a look at 1 Samuel 15. I'll just ease on over there and just take a quick look. 1 Samuel 15, verse 7. Oops. Samuel 15, now verse 7. And Samuel struck down the Amalekites from Havilah as far as where you come to Shur, which is next to Egypt. So this is just a verification. We're down here south and to the west, and but so it's right next to Egypt, which of course is in Africa on the other side of that strait there. And so you'll remember the record, and he took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, and that was a bad deal for Saul, as we find out. So let's take a look now in Samuel chapter 27. We'll stay in the same book here, 1 Samuel 27. Now we're going to have David is also going to deal in this area. And in verse 8, and David and his men went up and made a raid of the Geshurites and the Griztites and the Amalekites, for those were the inhabitants of the land who were old as you go to Shur as far as the land of Egypt. So these are a couple references of this area. So we actually know that this is not Assyria. This is in the Shur area, and those two areas have been identified and documented in the Bible. So now we're back to Genesis 25, and we're going to look at verse 19. So now we're moving on to the birth of Jacob and Esau, and they were twins. Now these are the descendants of Isaac. So we've got Isaac, the son of Abraham. Abraham fathered Isaac. We know this. And then we have in verse 20, Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Paddan Aram, the sister of Laban, the Aramean, to be his wife. So we're talking about Aram. It's the Aramean is people from Aram, and Aram is up in the large part of what is today Syria, the Paddan Aram area, and so they were considered Arameans. In verse 21, we have a similar situation here. And Isaac prayed to Yahweh for his wife because she was barren. Now, Sarah was also barren. And now we have Rebekah being barren. And so Isaac prayed to Yahweh because she is barren, and Yahweh answered his prayer, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. So, the prayers of righteous people are very effective. And we saw that earlier, the prayer of the senior servant of Abraham when he prayed for guidance on Rebekah, it came to pass. This is encouraging for people to pray because God does answer the prayers, and they're documented throughout the Bible, of course. Now, we got an interesting thing going on here. She conceived, but man, oh man, was her conception interesting, or her pregnancy, because verse 22, but the children struggled, and this struggle is not just struggle, it's a mighty struggle inside her. And she says, well, what's going on? What's happening here? And she wants to know what it means. So she knows something is out of the ordinary. These are her first children, I understand, but she's going to be around other mothers that were pregnant. And those of you who have had children, know that babies in later term of life of their development before they're born, they move. You can actually see an elbow. I've seen my kids' elbows cross over my wife's belly, and I could see them, and I could actually touch them and almost hold them a little bit while they were still inside her. But that would be normal, the movement. But these two guys are having at it. And so what does she do? She doesn't just stay clueless. She prays. In verse 23, well, let me finish the verse. She said, if it is so, why am this way? In other words, you might say, what's going on? And she went to inquire of Yahweh. Now, we don't know where she went, but she went somewhere to do her acquiring. Maybe there was a special place there that she thought would be helpful for her to be. In verse 23, and Yahweh said to her, this is her answer now. She's getting an answer when she went to inquire. 2 nations are in your womb. Well, not literally, of course, but 2 nations are in your womb, and two peoples from your belly will be divided. One people will be stronger than the other, and the elder will serve the younger. So the prayer is the answer to the prayer is these two children, which are eventually going to be named Jacob and Esau, one of them is going to be greater. And the prophecy said that the elder would serve the younger. Now, as we go through this record, we're going to see that's true. Now, Esau would be the father of the Edomite nation, and they would serve Jacob. We're going to see this come to pass. This prophecy is going to come to pass. So we know Jacob fathered the 12 tribes that were called Israel, but Esau is going to become the father of the Edomite nation. And we'll get into the details of why it was called Edom in the longer. And the elder, and of course, the elder was Esau. He was the elder. He comes out first, which we're going to see. And in verse 24, and the days to give birth were fulfilled, and behold, there were twins in her womb. The first came out reddish. First came out reddish. And so I've got a detail here. Esau is reddish and hairy. Now, the word reddish in the Hebrew is kind of interesting. Admon, Admon. And we're going to see later on, Esau is going to be called Edom from that word. And that's how you get from Esau to Edomites. You know, you might say, why aren't they calling them Esomites, if they're from Esau? But that's why they're called Edomites, because of that, what I just told you. Okay. Now, we're going to find out too, there's a lot of stuff that this particular prophecy was firm. This is what God said, but we're going to see Rebecca is going to make some mistakes here. She either forgets about the prophecy or she decides it's just better to deceive Isaac in order to get the blessing. And it doesn't make any sense. And this deceit is going to have consequences, as we're going to see. She's going to try to trick her husband, Isaac, to bless her son Jacob, who was the second born. And the second born isn't supposed to be the one who gets blessed. It ends up that Jacob gets in trouble with his brother and has to flee the country to get away from Esau, who's after him. And so her life goes by and she actually died without ever seeing her son again, this particular son. And this son was very close to her. And so it's just a consequence. When God says something's going to happen, we don't have to try to guarantee that it is. It's his job to make it come through. And so in verse 26, and after his brother came out, his hand was grasping at Esau's heel. So his brother comes out, and apparently Jacob's hand comes out right after Esau, grabbing at Esau's heel. So you probably heard the phrase and we're going to read it, I think, Esau is going to call Jacob, you old heel snatcher. Well, that's what he was talking about. It was like, no, you're not coming out from me before me. And so this kind of rivalry these two kids plays out through their life. So and so he's called Jacob, which has to do with grasping or heel snatching. And so Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. So they had been married approximately 20 years. So she was barren. Because they got married at 40. So she was barren for 20 years, and then finally she was not. So let's move on to verse 27. The boys grew up. Now Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the field. So Esau is kind of out there. He's doing cool stuff. Most men like to hunt, and he becomes a skillful hunter and a man of the field. Now it's interesting if this phrase, a man of the field, carries more to it than just him hunting out in the field. If you remember Cain and Abel, where did Abel want him to go? So he could kill him out into the field. When Jesus talks in the parable of the sower, when he talks about the seeds that fall out onto the field, the out in the field is often, every time you see these three records, it means worldly, in the world, ungodly place. So it's indicating here that Esau isn't really a godly person. He's a man of the field, a man of the world. And we're going to see this play out here as we read the record. Jacob was a quiet man, staying among the tents, watering the house plants or whatever he wanted to do. Now, so he's a lot different than his brother. His older brother is out hunting, and he's staying home, kind of around his mom and whatever he does near. Probably took care of some of the animals, whatever. But he was not aggressively out there. Now, verse 28, we learned something here. Now, Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for wild game. Isaac liked wild game, and wild game has a different flavor. Anybody who's eaten wild game knows it tastes different. He liked that. But Rebekah loved Jacob. So you have favoritism. So I'm sure they both loved their son, but they had favorites. Isaac favored Esau, and Rebekah favored Jacob. So we move on to verse 29. And, the brothers, as I said, we're going to see they became envious. And you can just see, Isaac is saying, that's my son. He's out in the field hunting, he's out there giving this game, which I love to eat, where Jacob was more of that homebody. So Jacob is hanging around the tents and he's making stew. Nothing wrong with that, but that's what he's doing. So he's at the tent making some stew. And Esau said to Jacob, I boils the stew, and Esau comes in from the field and he's exhausted and hungry. Now, if my two sons, if my eldest son he tends to be, they both like to cook, but if he's cooking, and his younger brother Tijah, who really likes to hunt, likes guns, and he came in, and TJ says to Anthony, I am starved. What's on the stove? Well, Anthony would say, I'm cooking some lentils. You want some? It'll be ready in just a minute. Why don't you have a seat? Cool off. Why don't you get some lemonade? Now that's how sons that love each other, that's what they do. They give stuff away, right? But look what happens here. Esau said to Jacob, please let me gulp down some of that red stuff, because I'm exhausted and hungry. And so his name is called Edom because of the red stuff. We'll get another red issue here. And then Jacob doesn't say, oh, of course, I think it's ready. Help yourself. Jacob says, first, sell me your birthright. Nice. Well, what does the elder's birthright mean? It means he gets twice the inheritance. It's valuable. A birthright is valuable. And then it's interesting here because Esau doesn't seem to be indignant about it or saying, you're crazy. What do you mean? Esau is very emotional, says, I'm about to die. So what use is my birthright to me? Pretty short-sighted there. He's not about to die. He's just hungry. It's a lot of hyperbole here. That's pretty wild and indicates Jacob isn't doing much thinking about it. And he doesn't seem to be that concerned about his birthright. So he's willing to sell it for a pot of stew. And so the deal is done. Jacob says, now he wants it just not a casual, he wants him to swear. So Jacob says, first swear to me. And so what did Esau do? He swore, sold his birthright to Jacob. And then Jacob gave Esau bread and boiled lentils. Now, this is interesting here. This next phrase of words. He ate, drank, got up, and went off. Normally, you sit down and you talk, you have a friendly chat. Well, how did it go out in the field today? Did you get any wild game? Hey, this stew tastes really good. Really nice. None of that family talk. It kind of shows that it was all business. So Esau showed contempt for his birthright. So there's every indication that these guys were at odds. They were rivals. From the time of their birth, this was going on. So let's continue here. in the next chapter. And I tell you what, guys, what time is it? I don't have a clock around here. Let me take a look at Doug's clock. Oh, it's 5 minutes. Oh, okay. Thanks, Doug, for the use of your clock. I'm in a new office here and there's no clock. I'm used to having one around me. Okay, now we'll see how far we get. I'm not going to keep you guys late. First, chapter 26. Now we get the reaffirmation of the promise to Isaac. So we're in verse 1. We'll read 1 and 2. Now there was a famine in the land besides the previous famine that had occurred in the days of Abraham, and Isaac went to Gerar. Now we remember Gerar, right? Because that's where Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, lived. And so he went to Gerar. So the thought is that he's heading toward Egypt like Abraham did, but right now he's in Gerar. And so God steps in, he tells Isaac, he says, and Yahweh appeared to Isaac and said, don't go down to Egypt, live in the land where I tell you. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. To you and to your seed, I will give all these lands, and I will fulfill the oath that I swore to Abraham, your father. So he continues, I will multiply your seed as the stars of heaven and will give to you your seed all these lands. And by your seed, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. So how's that happen? We're looking messianic. That's how all the nations of the earth will be blessed, because we're talking about his descendant will be the Messiah. Verse 5, because Abraham listened to my voice. Now, in order to obey, you have to listen first, right? So Abraham listened to my voice, and he kept my requirements, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Basically, God's saying he did everything I asked him to do. So here you go. What's Isaac do? He did what God said. He lived in Gerar. So I've got a map of Gerar here. I was thinking I had a different map, but this is what I've got here. And you can see Beersheba, which a lot of stuff happened. Abraham did the oath there. And that's where Beersheba means oath or well of the seven, oath of the seven deal. And we're going to see that something very similar is going to happen. And there's this valley here of Gerar. So we're going to see that there's some movement from Isaac up this valley of Gerar toward Beersheba. But this gives you an idea. Here's the Negev. We're going to talk about Rehoboth here pretty soon. You can see it down there. We got the Negev. We're down, and this is the Dead Sea here. So we're getting close to Egypt, but we're still a ways apart. Back to Genesis. So in verse, okay, we read all that all the way through 6. Very good. So so we're now bringing Abimelech back into the situation. Remember some of the stuff that happened with Abimelech, and we're going to see some similarities. So we'll just go through the record here. Verse 7, and the men of the place, what place? This Gerar area here where he was. The men of the place asked him about his wife. They're saying Rebecca, talking about Rebecca. And you know what he says? She is my sister. Boy, we heard that before, like father, like son, right? Just like his dad said about Sarah. She is my sister. At least when Abraham said it, he was half right because he was his half sister. But this isn't Isaac's sister. It's I think it's a great niece, depending. It's like a niece, some kind of niece, great niece. And but the same deal was going on. She's beautiful, and he's afraid. Like a reliving here. But when he had been there a long time, so he comes up with this saying, well, yeah, she's my wife. So, he's afraid somebody's going to kill him and take her. And when he had been there a long time, so time's going by, Abimelech like kind of was looking out the window, king of the Philistines, and looks out. Yeah, he was looking out of a window, and he saw, and behold, Isaac was caressing Rebekah, his wife. That's not how brothers and sisters act. She's his wife. So he caught on. And so Abimelech called Isaac. Remember when he got on Abraham's case? This was just like this is almost a redo, only not exactly. So Abimelech called Isaac and said, behold, surely she's your wife. So how could you say she's my sister? And Isaac said to him, well, because I said otherwise I might die because of her. The same story uh, that Abraham gave. And, oh my goodness. And then Abimelech said, what is this you have done to us? Before long, one of the people might have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt on us before. Well, you know what happened before with Sarah? They didn't even touch her, and all these bad things started happening in the country. So Abimelech commanded all the people, saying, he who touches this man or his wife will be put to death, yes, death. When you say it twice, that means if you make the crime, you're going to get the consequences. So he was pretty emphatic about it. He didn't want to have the women go barren and the cattle and all. If you remember that record, a lot of bad things happened, even though it didn't get that far. So we see something very similar here, like father and son. So let's see. I'll go on here. Now we're going to have a little trouble with water again. And doesn't this sound familiar? Remember Abraham and his herdsmen and Abimelech and his herdsmen, they had trouble. So let's go on in verse 12. Isaac sowed seed in the land. And so he actually planted stuff and he reaped in the same year 100-fold. So that shows the abundance of blessing that God is bestowing on Isaac. And the man became great. So remember Abraham becoming great? So now Isaac's becoming great, becoming greater and greater until he became very great. So he's got his crops are abundant, his herds, his flocks are abundant, his servants are abundant. Look at verse 14, and he owned flocks and herds and a large group of servants. So the Philistines envied him. They're starting to get worried. They're prospering, and the Philistines probably aren't so much. Verse 15. And all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham, his father, the Philistines, they stop them up, fill them with dirt. Okay, we're going to show Abraham he is unwelcome, and he's not going to have water for his people, or his cattle, or his herds, or his watering of crops. No water. Verse 16. Now Abimelech gets involved with it. And he says to Isaac, go away from us, for you are much stronger than we are. So not only we're talking about envy, but we're also looking about, a little bit of fear there. If these guys ever turned on us, I would not be able to overthrow them. And we saw what they did when Lot got captured. Abraham's crew went out and took him out. So Abimelech is a little bit uncomfortable. So Isaac basically says, okay. But God had told him to stay in that area, Gerar, right? So Isaac departed from there and encamped in the valley of Gerar and lived there. So he moved upstream a little bit toward Beersheba. And Isaac reopened the wells of water that they had dug in the days of Abraham, his father. So they get the dirt out that the Philistines had stopped them up after the death of Abraham. And he called their names by the names his father had called them. And so in verse 19, Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found a well of running water. That's nice. And the herdsmen of Gerar argued with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, the water's ours. And he called the name of the well Esek. And Esek means to quarrel, to be in disagreement. Okay. And then because they quarreled with him, so they dug another well. And they argued over that well also. So he called that one Sitnah. And Sitnah, let me see here, means strife or accusation. And so we got the same deal. So then, verse 22, now he left that place and dug a third well, another well, but they didn't argue over that one. So he called it Rehoboth. And he said, now Yahweh has made room for us and we will be fruitful in the land. And Rehoboth means open room for everybody. And they're not really sure exactly where Rehoboth is, but it was nearby. And that's where they finally got things set up. And he went up from there. So he was in Gerar in the Rehoboth area, and he went from there to Beersheba. Beersheba, I just showed you on the map. Yahweh appeared to him that night and said, I am the God of Abraham, your father. Do not be afraid, for I am with you and will bless you and multiply your seed for my servant Abraham's sake. So he gets a validation of what he's doing. He knows God's with him and he doesn't have to fear anything. And so this blessed Isaac. And so he built an altar there here in Beersheba and called on the name of Yahweh and pitched his tent there. And Isaac's servants also dug a well there. So they dug more wells. And so things kind of worked out there. But we still have Abimelech who's a little bit touchy here and unhappy about what's going on. So he does the same thing that he did to Abraham. He wants to get together and he wants an oath. Then Abimelech went to him in Gerar with Ashuzah, his counselor, and Phicol, the commander of the army. That was the same guy that went to see Abraham. And Isaac said to them, why have you come to me, since you hate me and have sent me away from you? Remember, that was the last conversation he had with Abimelech. And they said, we have seen, yes, seen that Yahweh was with you. We also said, let there be an oath between us and you, and let us cut a covenant with you, so that you will do no harm, because we have not touched you, and because we have done to you nothing but good, and have sent you away in peace. You are now the blessed Yahweh. Well, that's partially true. There is that issue with the people filling in the wells, but we can kind of let that slide, I guess. But anyhow, he wants an oath because he's afraid of Isaac and his greatness. And so make a promise. And that's the same thing that Abimelech did with Abraham. Let's make a promise. Let's have a covenant. Let's have an oath. And as I mentioned before, when you had an oath, if the oath was broken, there would be a curse. We talked about when the senior servant went up there to get Rebekah, that he made that oath after he got clarity from Abraham, knowing that if he broke it, there's going to be a problem, and they call that a curse. So we don't have the details of the covenant, but we do have in verse 30, so he made them a banquet, and they ate and they drank. So that's usually indicative of some very important thing that occurred, and they did make an oath. As it says in 31, they rose up early in the morning and swore an oath to each other. Then Isaac sent them away, and they departed from him in peace. So they came to Isaac, they did all this stuff, had a big party, off they go. And the same day, Isaac's servants came and told him about the well that they had dug, and he said, we have found water. So good news. And he called that Sheba. He named this well Sheba. So the name of the city is Beer Sheba. They're spelled similarly, but they're not exactly the same. Sheba is more related to the word oath, where the other one is more related to the word seven. But we still have that same feel of these words, and the town's name is Beersheba, which is well of the seven. And so all this fit together, the oath and covenant that was cut by Abraham, and then the oath and covenant that's cut by Isaac, and it was still over water, and it's still in the same part of the country. Kind of interesting how that all worked out. Okay, now we're going to wrap it up here with these last two verses. So here we are, Esau's wives. Now we talked about Esau being a man of the field. He's more of a worldly guy, and his decisions, he didn't have a problem giving up his birthright. So when Esau was 40 years old, he took as wife Judith, the daughter of Beri, a Hittite. So he's taken Hittite wives. The Hittites were polyistic, and their main god was Terhun, who was the god of storms. And Bamoth was the daughter of Elon, not Elon Musk, but Elon. Elon means an oak. That's a good name. The daughter of Elon the Hittite. So he marries Hittites. And guess what happens? Verse 35. And they were a source of bitterness to Isaac and Rebekah. And Rebekah is going to complain about this later on. And it doesn't seem to be that good a decision. And it kind of fits with Esau and what ends up happening to him, the Edomites, and the different things that were a problem for Israel later on. So, Heavenly Father, Lord Jesus Christ, thank you for your word. Thank you for the interesting things that occurred way back then, how we can learn about, you know, all these different things. There's so many lessons involved as we look for the lesson. Pray when we're not sure about things. When, in the case of Isaac, his wife she wasn't conceiving. He prayed and then she did. And then we see Esau and how didn't seem to want to be a godly person. And he makes bad decisions regarding his birthright and who he marries and the bitterness he brought to his parents because of their idol worship and how they looked at life was so contrary to how God did. So thank you for these lessons. Thank you for these people tonight. And as we have a good weekend coming up, and as we're approaching the Christmas season, we're just very thankful for all that you do for us. In the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. So that's stop the recording.